Welcome to Strides to Solutions. I'm your host, Esther Adams, and today we're going to break down the specific symptoms that doctors look for when diagnosing chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalomyelitis. If you've been experiencing confusing symptoms that affect your whole body and wondering if they could be connected, this episode will help you understand exactly what this condition looks like and why it's so much more than just being tired. The most important thing to understand right away is that chronic fatigue syndrome isn't just about feeling tired. It's about experiencing a very specific pattern of symptoms that affect nearly every system in your body. When doctors look for this condition, they're looking for a constellation of symptoms that work together to create a recognizable picture. Let me start with the symptom that has become the gold standard for diagnosing this condition: post exertional malaise. This might be a term you haven't heard before, but once I explain it, you'll understand why it's so crucial for getting a proper diagnosis. Post exertional malaise means that any type of exertion, whether physical, mental, or emotional, makes all your symptoms significantly worse for an extended period. This isn't like the normal tiredness healthy people feel after a workout that goes away with rest. This is a dramatic worsening of your entire symptom picture that can last for days, weeks, or even months. Here's what makes post exertional malaise so distinctive: it has a delayed reaction. You might do something that feels manageable in the moment, maybe take a short walk, attend a social gathering, or spend time concentrating on work and feel okay immediately afterward. But then, 12 to 72 hours later, you crash hard. During this crash, you don't just feel more tired. Every symptom you normally experience gets worse, and you might develop new symptoms you don't usually have. Your thinking becomes foggy, your pain increases, your sleep gets even worse, and you might feel like you have the flu even though you're not sick. Let me give you a concrete example. Sarah has chronic fatigue syndrome and decides to attend her daughter's school play. She sits in an auditorium for 2 hours, which doesn't seem like much exertion. She feels fine during the event and even enjoys herself, but 2 days later, she can barely get out of bed. Her usual fatigue has intensified dramatically. She can't think clearly enough to read or follow conversations. Her muscles ache all over, and she feels genuinely ill. This reaction lasts for a week. This delayed, disproportionate response to minimal exertion is what doctors call post exertional malaise, and it's the hallmark symptom that separates chronic fatigue syndrome from other conditions that cause tiredness. What makes this symptom so medically significant is that researchers can actually measure it objectively. There's a test called 2-day exercise testing where patients exercise on a treadmill or bike 2 days in a row. Healthy people and people with other conditions typically perform the same or better on the second day, but people with chronic fatigue syndrome show a significant drop in performance on day 2, proving that their bodies respond abnormally to exertion. Now let's talk about the profound sleep problems that are another core feature of this condition. This isn't just having trouble falling asleep occasionally or feeling groggy in the morning. This involves fundamental problems with how your sleep works that leave you feeling exhausted no matter how much time you spend in bed. The most characteristic sleep problem is called unrefreshing sleep. This means you can sleep for 8, 10, or even 12 hours and wake up feeling like you haven't slept at all. You might actually feel worse after sleeping than you did when you went to bed. This happens because the deep, restorative stages of sleep aren't working properly in people with chronic fatigue syndrome. Many people also have trouble falling asleep despite feeling physically exhausted. Your body feels tired, but your mind won't turn off, or you experience a strange feeling of being tired but wired. You might lie in bed for hours unable to fall asleep, even though you desperately need rest. Sleep maintenance is another major problem. You might fall asleep okay, but then wake up multiple times during the night, sometimes every hour or two. When you wake up, you might have trouble getting back to sleep, leaving you lying awake during what should be your most restorative sleep hours. Some people develop completely reversed sleep patterns, finding they can only sleep during the day and are more alert at night. Others need to sleep in multiple short periods throughout the day and night rather than having one normal sleep period. The cognitive symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome are often the most distressing and disabling aspects of the condition. Doctors and patients often refer to this as brain fog, but it's much more specific and measurable than that term suggests. Memory problems are usually one of the first cognitive symptoms people notice. You might have trouble remembering conversations you had earlier the same day, forget what you were doing in the middle of tasks, or be unable to remember where you put things just minutes after setting them down. Reading becomes difficult because you can't remember what happened at the beginning of a paragraph by the time you reach the end. Concentration problems make it nearly impossible to focus on tasks that used to be routine. You might start reading an article and realize you've read the same sentence 5 times without understanding it. Following the plot of a movie or TV show becomes challenging. You might start a simple task like paying bills and find yourself completely overwhelmed and unable to complete it. Word finding difficulties can make communication embarrassing and frustrating. You know exactly what you want to say, but you can't access the right words. You might use completely wrong words without realizing it, or stop mid sentence because you've completely lost your train of thought. Processing information becomes much slower. In conversations, you might need people to repeat themselves or speak more slowly. You fall behind in group discussions because you're still processing what someone said earlier while the conversation has moved on to new topics. Let me give you an example of how these cognitive symptoms might show up in daily life. Mark used to be an accountant who could easily handle complex financial calculations and manage multiple projects simultaneously. After developing chronic fatigue syndrome, he finds himself unable to balance his personal checkbook. Simple math that used to be automatic now requires intense concentration that exhausts him. He starts tasks but forgets what he was doing halfway through. Following written instructions becomes nearly impossible because he can't hold all the steps in his mind at once. The pain symptoms in chronic fatigue syndrome affect multiple parts of your body simultaneously and often have characteristics that distinguish them from other pain conditions. This isn't just having occasional aches and pains, it's experiencing persistent, often severe pain that can affect your muscles, joints, head, and other areas all at the same time. Muscle pain is extremely common and can affect any muscle group in your body. This pain might feel like you've run a marathon when you've barely moved, or like you're constantly getting over the flu. The pain can be aching, burning, or sharp, and it often moves around your body unpredictably. Joint pain typically affects multiple joints and can move from one area to another without any pattern. You might wake up with severe knee pain that disappears by afternoon, but is replaced by shoulder pain. This pain occurs without any visible swelling or redness that you'd see with arthritis. Headaches in chronic fatigue syndrome often have different characteristics than any headaches you experienced before becoming ill. They might be more severe, more frequent, or feel different, perhaps more like pressure than your previous tension headaches, or sharp and stabbing instead of dull and aching. Many people experience chest pain that can be frightening because it might make you worry about heart problems. This pain can feel like pressure, sharp stabbing, or aching, and it typically occurs without any actual heart problems when doctors do testing. The autonomic nervous system controls all the automatic functions in your body that you don't normally think about, things like heart rate, blood pressure, temperature control, and digestion. In chronic fatigue syndrome, this system doesn't work properly, creating symptoms that can be particularly scary because they affect basic body functions. Orthostatic intolerance is one of the most common autonomic problems. This means you have trouble being upright, standing, or sometimes even sitting for normal periods of time. When you stand up, your heart might race, you might feel dizzy or lightheaded, nauseous, sweaty, or weak. Some people actually faint when they stand up. Let me explain what this might feel like in practical terms. Jennifer has chronic fatigue syndrome and tries to take a shower. Standing under the hot water for just a few minutes makes her heart race. She feels dizzy and nauseous, and she has to sit down in the shower or risk fainting. What used to be a routine 5-minute activity now requires planning and recovery time. Temperature regulation problems mean you might feel cold when everyone else is comfortable, or be unable to warm up no matter how many layers you wear. You might have sudden hot flashes or cold spells that don't seem related to the actual temperature around you. Some people sweat excessively from minimal activity, while others can't sweat appropriately. Heart rate problems can include your heart racing during minimal activity, feeling palpitations or irregular heartbeats, or having your heart rate increase dramatically when you change positions from lying to sitting or standing. Digestive problems are extremely common and can include nausea that might be constant or come in waves, bloating and stomach pain, constipation or diarrhea, and suddenly developing food intolerances to things you used to eat without problems. The immune like symptoms in chronic fatigue syndrome make many people feel like they have a constant viral infection. You might experience recurrent sore throats that don't seem to be caused by actual infections, swollen or tender lymph nodes, especially in your neck and armpits, feeling feverish without actually having a measurable fever, and general flu like symptoms that come and go. These symptoms often get worse during post exertional malaise episodes, making you feel genuinely sick in addition to being exhausted and cognitively impaired. Sensory sensitivities can become severe and disabling in ways that are hard for healthy people to understand. Light sensitivity might mean that normal indoor lighting feels painfully bright, requiring you to wear sunglasses inside or spend time in darkened rooms. The light from computer screens or television might become intolerable. Sound sensitivity can make normal conversation volumes overwhelming. You might need to turn the television volume down to levels that other people can barely hear, or find that multiple people talking at once creates unbearable noise. Some people can't tolerate music, traffic sounds, or even the hum of appliances. Touch sensitivity might make normal clothing uncomfortable or painful. The texture of certain fabrics might feel irritating, or light touch that should be pleasant might actually hurt. Some people can't wear jewelry, watches, or anything tight around their waist or neck. Smell and taste sensitivities can make previously pleasant scents overwhelming or nauseating. Perfumes, cleaning products, or cooking smells might trigger headaches or nausea. Food might taste different or lose its flavor entirely. Balance and coordination problems can make you feel unsteady on your feet, like you might fall even when you're not dizzy. You might bump into doorways, drop things more frequently, or have trouble with fine motor tasks like writing or buttoning clothes. Let me paint a picture of how all these symptoms might come together in someone's daily experience. Lisa is a 35-year-old teacher who developed chronic fatigue syndrome after a viral infection. Before becoming ill, she was energetic, social, and managed a full-time job plus an active family life. Now, Lisa wakes up after 10 hours of sleep, feeling like she hasn't slept at all. Getting dressed requires multiple rest breaks because standing to put on clothes makes her heart race and leaves her dizzy. The morning sunlight streaming through her bedroom window is painfully bright, so she keeps the curtains closed and wears sunglasses inside. She tries to read the news on her phone but can't concentrate long enough to finish a single article. The words seem to blur together, and she can't remember what she read in the first paragraph by the time she reaches the second. Making breakfast becomes overwhelming because she can't remember the steps for making scrambled eggs, something she's done thousands of times. By mid-morning, Lisa's muscles ache like she has the flu, even though she's barely moved. Her joints are stiff and painful, and she has a headache that feels different from any headaches she had before becoming ill. She feels nauseous and has no appetite, even though she knows she needs to eat. Lisa decides to rest on the couch, but lying still doesn't help. Her mind feels foggy and confused. She's sensitive to every sound in the house, and she feels generally unwell in a way that's hard to describe to others. This is a relatively good day for her. She's not in the middle of a post-exertional malaise crash. The fluctuating nature of these symptoms is important to understand. You might have days where symptoms are somewhat manageable, followed by periods where they're severe and disabling. This fluctuation doesn't mean the condition is psychological or that you're exaggerating symptoms on bad days. It reflects the unstable nature of the underlying biological problems. Some people experience remissions where symptoms improve significantly for weeks or months, followed by relapses where symptoms return to previous severity or become worse. These patterns are unpredictable and don't seem to be related to stress, activity levels, or other obvious triggers. The severity of chronic fatigue syndrome can range from mild cases where people can work or attend school with modifications, to moderate cases where people are mostly housebound, to severe cases where people are bedbound and require assistance with basic care. Even mild cases represent significant disability compared to normal health. Understanding that these symptoms cluster together into a recognizable pattern helps explain why chronic fatigue syndrome affects every aspect of your life. The combination of physical exhaustion, cognitive impairment, pain, sleep problems, and autonomic dysfunction creates a level of disability that's hard for healthy people to comprehend. It's important to recognize that experiencing many of these symptoms doesn't automatically mean you have chronic fatigue syndrome. Other medical conditions can cause similar symptoms, which is why proper medical evaluation is essential. However, if you recognize this pattern of symptoms, especially the characteristic post exertional malaise, it's worth discussing with a healthcare provider who's knowledgeable about chronic fatigue syndrome. The key diagnostic requirement is that these symptoms must persist for at least 6 months and represent a significant decrease from your previous level of functioning. The symptoms must be severe enough to substantially impact your work, school, social activities, or personal life. What makes chronic fatigue syndrome diagnostically challenging is that there's no single test that can confirm the diagnosis. Instead, doctors have to recognize the pattern of symptoms and rule out other conditions that might cause similar problems. This process can take time and requires finding healthcare providers who understand the condition. Many people go years without a proper diagnosis because their symptoms are dismissed as psychological, attributed to depression or anxiety, or explained away as normal stress or aging. Understanding the specific symptom pattern can help you advocate for appropriate evaluation and avoid years of misdiagnosis. The multi-system nature of chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms explains why the condition is so debilitating and why simple treatments focused on just one aspect, like fatigue or sleep, are usually insufficient. The interconnected nature of symptoms means that addressing the whole picture requires comprehensive approaches. For people experiencing these symptom patterns, recognition and validation can provide enormous relief after years of feeling confused, dismissed, or blamed for their condition. Understanding that these symptoms represent a legitimate medical condition with measurable biological abnormalities can help reduce self-blame and provide direction for treatment. The complexity of chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms also explains why recovery often requires patience and persistence. Because so many body systems are affected, improvement typically occurs gradually and may involve ongoing management rather than complete cure. However, understanding your symptoms and having a proper diagnosis opens the door to treatments and management strategies that can significantly improve your quality of life and functioning. Many people with chronic fatigue syndrome find ways to live fulfilling lives within the constraints of their condition when they have appropriate support and management approaches. The important message is that these symptoms are real, measurable, and represent a serious medical condition that deserves appropriate attention and care. You're not imagining your symptoms, you're not weak or lazy, and you deserve healthcare providers who take your condition seriously and work with you to develop effective management strategies.